area with a Cajun joke. Thibodeau, he went over to Boudreaux's cabin and he said, "Boudreaux, you been to do the fishing and the hunting?" And poor Boudreaux, he said, "No, cher." He says, "Ever since Clotilde died, I got these 4 young'uns and all I do is change the diaper, wash the diaper, change the diaper, wash the diaper. I got no time for to do the hunting and the fishing." And Thibodeau, he said, "What's the matter with you, Boudreaux? Ain't you heard about them pampertings?" "Pampertings? What be they?" "It's the greatest invention. You put the pamper on the diaper, the baby messed the diaper, you take the pamper off, you throw it in the bayou. No more washing, no more changing." He said, "I'll try them things." So about a month later, old Thibodeau came back and he said, "Hey, Boudreaux, you been to doing the hunting and the fishing?" And Boudreaux said, "Oh, I've been doing the hunting and the fishing. Them pampertings, the greatest thing." Just then, a little 2-year-old come around the side of the cabin and he had a little load in his pants. And Thibodeau went over there and said, "Boudreaux, what's wrong with you? You need to change this thing." And Boudreaux, he went over and checked. He said, "It's not ready yet." He said, "What you mean not ready?" He said, "The box say good up to 19 pounds. I have spent the last 36 years of my life learning a verse. Did you hear the key word? Learning. Haven't learned it yet, but I'm in the process. And I want to help you in that process today. The verse is Philippians 4:13. It says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Now that's a great verse, potentially, if you understand what it means. But if you don't understand what it means, it's a very perplexing and frustrating verse. I'd like to illustrate what I mean by that. When I was in seminary, a friend of mine was the chaplain at University of Southern California Trojans. And they, of course, are known for their nationally ranked football team, but in those days they had a very, very good swim team. And their swim team had made it to the national championships where they were playing, or swimming, I guess you call it, against the University of Illinois for the national championship. And so my friend went to do this chaplain role, and he went into the University of Illinois locker room, and the Christian swimmers, they were all huddled together, and one of them was saying, "Guys, I found the verse for us today. It's Philippians 4:13. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. We'll claim that verse today, and we'll win." So my friend did his chaplain thing, and he headed over to the University of Southern California Trojans locker room, only to find that the Christian young men and women there were sharing the same verse and claiming the same victory. Now what's the problem? One of those teams is going to lose. And when they lose, they might begin to doubt God because God didn't come through for them. More likely, they will doubt themselves. Say something like, "We didn't have enough faith." And begin to live under guilt and shame. And that becomes a very perplexing verse for them. As I read my Bible, I don't see where God requires great faith. And I'm pretty excited about that. All he requires is a little teeny, say teeny bit of faith in a great big God who responds to itty-bitty faith. You see, what those poor people were doing was taking a verse, which is a very marvelous verse, and taking it out of its context. Context is the number one rule of interpreting the Bible. If you have a text without a context, you have what's called a pretext, which means you can make the Bible say anything you want it to say. Or if you have a context and you take the text without the context, all you've got is a con, and that's what's happened to a lot of people. They're getting conned by a lot of preachers. I was listening on Christian radio years ago to a man teaching out of Matthew 25 and 26, the abomination of desolation that Jesus prophesied over Jerusalem. And then Jesus said in those passages, don't come down off the roof. It's going to be dangerous in the streets of Jerusalem. And this old boy preached on how don't come down off the roof, man. Every woman ought to keep their hair up in a bun. Had a friend of mine who was counseling a couple once for marriage counseling, and after he dealt with them for several weeks, he finally told him, you're the most incompatible couple I've ever met. Why did you ever get married? And they said, well, our pastor preached this sermon out of Joshua, where you march around, 7 times and give the shout, and the walls come tumbling down. And he said, when you find a girl of your prospective dreams, you march around her 7 times, give a shout, her resistance will come down, you can pop the question, and she'll marry you. My friend said, you're kidding. He said, no, I'm serious. He said, what's the phone number of your pastor? Calls out the pastor. He said, I got a couple here in my office. They said that you preached this sermon, march around the girl 7 times, give a shout, resistance, pop the question. And the guy said, oh, yes, I've gotten many wonderful sermons out of that passage. It's got nothing to do with marriage. It's about taking down the literal walls of Jericho by the Israelites as they entered into the land by faith, putting their faith, little bitty faith, in a great big God who can do great big things. So what is the context of Philippians? Well, if you read it and you go to verse 12, Paul said, I've learned how to be content in all circumstances. I've been sick, I've been healthy, I've had money, I've had no money, I've been in good health and in bad health, and I have found that in whatever circumstance I'm in, God will be to me all that he is to all that I need at the moment of faith. This is the verse I've been learning. I began learning it back in college. I played football for Cal State under a man named Jack Elway, John Elway's father. And we had a wonderful time under Coach Jack. And then he went off to Stanford, and we got a new guy in, and I wasn't real high on the new guy. We were returning 17 starters for my senior year, which means you're going to have a great season. But we had a rookie coach, a lot of injuries, and we were 1-9 going into my final game as a senior. That's a terrible way to end your football career. We're losing by 3 touchdowns. At least if we can win our final game, we can have a little bit of redemption. Well, in the second half, we scored with about 8 minutes to go. And we're now down by 2 touchdowns. Coach comes to me and says, Frank, I want you to kick off. And we have got to get this. I want you to kick an onside kick. We've got to get the ball. That's okay, Coach. Which side do you want me to kick it to? He said, whatever side is most open. Well, Coach, I'm not going to know what side's most open until we break out of the huddle and see how they line up. He said, well, give them a sign. So using my college education, I thought of this. If I hold up my right hand, we'll go to the right. And if I hold up my left hand, we'll go to the left. Ready, guys? Break! And we came out of the huddle. I looked over the field, and their left side was covered. Their right side's wide open. You see what I did? Their right's not my right. I kicked the ball this way. My team ran this way. The old boy picked up the ball and trotted 60 yards into the end zone. Now, I was preseason All-American that year, and the headlines told the story. All-American doesn't know his right from his left. I went to school on a rather large campus, and for the next 6 months until I graduated, hi, Frank, how you doing? Hey. Now, what does the verse say? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Fast forward a little bit, got married, had some kids. I went and did a counseling internship in Atlanta. So I would drive over to Atlanta 9 hours every Sunday. I'd spend Monday through Friday there in this internship, drive home Friday, spend 1 day with my family, and head back to Atlanta. So while I'm home on Saturday, I'd do all those honeydew chores. So I'm a buzzsaw. I'm draining the oil on the cars. I'm mowing the lawn. I'm cleaning the pool. I'm doing everything I can. Buzzsaw, get it all done, and have a little family time. Well, my ever-obedient son hadn't picked up the dog stuff. And we had 2 dogs, and one of them a monster. So there was a lot of stuff. So I get it into the plastic bag, and I put the plastic bag down on the concrete, and I'm mowing the lawn. The engine's, the oil's chaining, and the pool, and I come up, and I'm mowing the lawn. I come around the bag, and you know that still small voice? Move the bag. I'm in a hurry. Turn off the engine. No, I'm in a hurry. I can do this. And I did. I maneuvered around the bag, but it was what's called a rotary mower. Rotary mowers create suction. And so as I came around the bag started to flutter. Zoom! Into the engine it goes. Now, being a rotary mower, it begins to spin the bag in a 360, which hits the handlebars, cuts about a 6-inch slit, and begins to sling a lot of stuff. It's going on the walls, in the pool. I'm covered with it. The dog comes running over to investigate and says, "Get away from me before I kill you." And I looked over at my daughter, and you know that look? That if you laugh, you know you're going to heaven? And I looked at her and I said, "Don't you dare." And I yelled it, because that's what it was. I said dung because I'm a Christian. You don't believe that, do you? Yeah, I didn't. And just then my wife came out for all the commotion, and she's so sweet. She says, "What happened?" I said, "I tried to maneuver around the bag, and I'm covered with it." And she goes, "Well, it looks like you maneuvered around it." Oh. Y'all remember that Jackie Gleason show, To the Moon, Alice? But what's the verse say? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We were out on a family outing a couple years later. I was driving down Burbank Boulevard. All of a sudden, I flipped to you. My wife said, "What's wrong?" I said, "There's a pair of pliers back there." Men? So I flipped around to get these pliers, and she says, "Aren't you going to pull to the side of the road?" I said, "I can do this." So I opened up the door, and I leaned out, and I couldn't reach them because we were in the van, and vans are high up. So I flipped around, came back for a second try, and I'm leaning out to get the pliers, and I couldn't reach them, so I undid the seatbelt, and I fell out of the car. So my family is going down Burbank Boulevard. I got the pliers and headed off in hot pursuit to get my van. And just then it hit me. I could see my wife trying to hit the brake, and she couldn't reach because of her seatbelt. And I realized she's going to flip that thing into park and ruin my transmission. "Don't put it," and just then she did it. Boom. But now I had a pair of pliers to help me fix the transmission. And what does the verse say? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Our littlest baby girl has a rare disease. I'm going to talk about her today. I had her out in the backyard, and I had her on the swing. And she was just belly roll laughing. What I would do is I was pushing her from the front instead of the back. And then I'd turn around like this, and I'd say, "Don't you kick me." And just as she'd get right about there, I'd jump like she'd kicked me, and she's belly roll laughing. And my son comes out. He said, "What you doing, Dad?" I said, "Watch this. Avery just loves this." So I pushed her back, and I got in front of her, and I said, "Don't you kick me." And now that I had an audience, I had adrenaline. You know how audiences will do that to you? So when she did that, I jumped further than I had been jumping, and I jumped into the planter. And in the planter, there were these rocks, and one was on top of the other, and it's kind of like a fulcrum. So when I hit the rock, it propelled me forward into the deck. And so being an ex-football player, I can see that deck's going to hit me, so I hit that deck before the deck hit me. Boom. And I crashed through 3 2x4s, landed on the deck, smashed, and I looked over at my son, and he said, "I can see why she likes that, Dad." And the verse says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And it never seems to end. I taught this message a few years ago on the power that women have over men. We'll have a meeting tonight at 4 with all the men, just for you. And they do have power. They need to learn how to use that power, or they're going to use it ineffectively. So it was a very thought-provoking message. And as I'm heading out the door, my sound man comes up to me. He says, "Man, Frank, that's some of the most profound stuff I've ever heard. I can't wait to get home. I'm having a talk with my wife." I said, "Well, that's exciting." And he says, "But that gesture you were doing." I said, "Gesture? What are you talking about, David?" He goes, "You got to go home and ask Janet." So I spend my 15-minute ride home going, gesture, what is he talking about? So I walked in the door, and my wife was there. I said, hey, baby. And she said, hey. And I said, David said I was making a gesture. She said, oh, I can't believe you were doing that. You embarrassed me. I said, baby, what was I doing? She says, women, you have got to understand the power that you have over men. I don't remember doing it. And the verse says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. My wife and I, when we got married, we prayed and we decided before God that we wanted 4 babies. We wanted to wait for about 4 or 5 years and really become one. But I came home after about 6 months and she was crying, and I said, baby, what's the matter? And she said, I'm pregnant. I said, baby, you can't be. She said, I'm pregnant. I said, well, what about birth control? She said, I'm pregnant. And I said, well, you know what that means? She said, what? I can't be stopped. She didn't think it was funny. I thought it was hilarious, but she didn't. I can do all things as I slept on the couch. But, so we had number 1. Beautiful little girl. And then God graced us with number 2, a very special young man. And then my bride got sick. And I would come home and she would just be on the couch where I left her that morning. She had no energy, no strength. We took her all over the Northeast to different hospitals, and we ended up at the University of Pennsylvania Med Center, where they took her on as a guinea pig and ran thousands and thousands of dollars worth of tests, and finally concluded something had happened to her pituitary gland, and it had shut down her endocrine system. So she had no thyroid, no estrogen, and all that kind of stuff that makes us be and function as who we are. And so basically they would supplement her with artificial stuff and told us that we would never, ever have any more children. And I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. After about 8 years, I came home one day and my bride said, I've been praying and I'm going off my meds. And I said, baby, you know, if you go off your meds, all your symptoms will come back. And she said, I know. But I just don't want to do this anymore. So she went off all her meds, and about 3 months later, she went to her quarterly visit with her doc, and the doc came in and said, all right, everything's fine, just keep taking your meds. And Janet gave a big old smile and said, I'm not on my meds. And the doc said, oh my goodness. And our Father had decided to heal my bride. And so we started asking if maybe our dream of 4 babies might come true. And number 3 came along. And so we named her Faith. And then we said, well, maybe we can have our number 4. And number 4 was conceived. And we were well on our way to fulfilling our dream. We had always done the surprise thing for the birth of our babies. But now, you know, they can determine the sex beforehand. So we decided we wanted to try that once, since this would be the last one. So we went in at the 4th month, and the ultrasound technician said, I can't tell because this little baby has her legs crossed. Okay, so we went back in the 5th month and tried again, and little baby had the legs crossed. And I said, well, it has the modesty of her father. So at 6 months, when we went in, I said, I want to try one more time. And my bride said, let's just take this from God. And I said, no, baby, I want to try one more time. And so they tried, and we found out that we had a little girl. And number 4 was now Avery Michaelin. But after we found that out, Bonnie, our technician, who was a good friend, didn't stop scanning. And she scanned, and she scanned, and she scanned, and that got me a little nervous, and my bride a little nervous. And I said, Bonnie, what you doing? And she said, well, I need you to call Mary, that's our doctor, today when you get home. That's what's the matter, Bonnie. She said, I can't say for sure, but I want you to call Mary. When we got home, I called Mary, and Bonnie had already called Mary. And Mary said, I got to see you right away. And we went in to see Mary, and we were whisked from Mary to what's called a neonatologist. And the neonatologist ran some quick tests and looked at my bride and I and said, I'm sorry, but I believe this child is a chromosome 13 or 18 child. And I said, what does that mean? They said, that means this baby's not going to survive outside the womb. And that was troubling because we had waited so long for God to fulfill our dream, only for God to fulfill our dream and then yank it away from us. And what does the verse say? I can do this through Christ, who will provide me with the strength to be able to do it. We headed home in silence, and about halfway home, my bride looked at me and said, how are we going to tell those kids? I said, baby, let me take care of this. I got this. So after dinner, we gathered the babes in and sat them around, and I said, Avery's sick. She has a disease. I don't remember which one it was, but one of them said, that's okay, Dad, we'll take her any way we can get her. And I said, well, what about this disease? And another one said, well, we'll pray that God will heal her. I said, but what if he doesn't heal her? What if he wants to take her home? And that third little kid looked at me and said, then Daddy, we'll let her go. You know, I played athletics all my life, and my attic is stuffed full of big trophies that are collecting dust. And I don't think I've known a prouder moment in my life than to watch those little kids trust God in the midst of adversity. We had to wait 2 agonizing weeks to go in. And when we went in, this neonatologist walked in and surprised us with these words. He said, I was wrong. Your little girl has a foot abnormality. She's got problem with her digestive system. She's going to need instant surgery the day she's born. But I think she's going to be okay. Now, there is a problem. There is a blockage in her intestines, and the upper side of those intestines are dilating. And so we're going to have to watch her because they're in danger of bursting. If they burst, we lose her. So every week we had to go in and wait and watch, and they kept testing Janet to see if she could deliver the baby with a lung test, if the baby's lungs were okay. And one day we went in for one of those lung tests, and she failed the test. She had to stay and incubate a while. And that night, Michael Lynn decided she wasn't waiting, but her lungs weren't ready. But Janet's water broke. So we rushed to the hospital, and Mary is a good friend, our doctor, and we were laughing and joking in the delivery room. And when Avery Michael Lynn came into the world, Mary got a very serious look on her face and didn't even let us hold the baby. They just handed her to a nurse, and the nurse whisked this child off to the NICU, where we were told by a doctor later that day, I don't think she's going to live the day. It seems there was a lot more wrong than what we thought. One of the doctors came to me and said, Frank, do you practice infant baptism? I've heard you're a pastor. I said, why do you want to know? He said, I think you should do it immediately, which had obvious implications. They did emergency surgery on her, and I wheeled my bride up because she had had a C-section up to see her child. You know, on 3 previous occasions, I got to be in there with my bride and watch life come into the world. I will carry to my grave the joy on her face. Can you relate, mamas? as you get prepared to see that child for the first time. I got to see that 3 times. This time there was a look of dread and fear. And they held this little child up. And my bride said, "Oh my God, she's a little broken doll." She had a neuromuscular disease, so she was unable to move in the womb. And so as she grew, the womb basically constricted her and distorted her. And we waited. The doctor said she wouldn't live the day, and she did. So the doctor said, well, she won't live the week, and she did. It was time for Janet to come home. And another one of those times, as I put her in the car and she looked back into the back seat of an empty car seat while they were wheeling other mamas out. And I thought to myself, man, this hospital could have been a little more sensitive. But I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And we settled in and we waited and we waited and we waited, not having a diagnosis. Finally, little Avery began to rally. And after almost 4 months, we got to bring her home. She was home for 3 weeks, and she crashed. And when she crashed, we were back in NICU. And each day that she was in NICU, she began to grow worse. And I would come in sometimes, and there'd be nurses and doctors around her, and it was the cardiac crash team because she had cardiac arrested. And nobody could figure out what was wrong with this child. You know, wait is probably the worst 4-letter word in the English language. Finally, after about 3 more months in NICU and with her crashing, and the lab called and they had found out what was wrong. She had a third world bacteria that she'd picked up and a very rare blood fungal infection. The good news is they could treat it with massive antibiotics, which meant another longer stay. The antibiotics began to work, and she gradually got better. And finally, after about 6 months, we received the news on a Tuesday afternoon that we could bring this child home and finally be a family. They did say on one condition. There was a new med she had to get. They gave us the med. I gave the child the med in her bottle, and instantly she began to grow agitated. She threw up. I said, there's something wrong with this medicine. The nurse said, oh no, this is exactly what the doctor prescribed. We gave her a second dose. Again, the agitation, again, the nausea. I went to the nurse the second time. I said, I'm telling you, there's something wrong with this medicine. Double checks the records. It's exactly what he ordered. Look, Mr. Friedman, just go home. The next dose is due at 11. I'll cut the dose in half. If there's any problem, I'll call you. And I'll call the doctor. So we drove home. About 11 o'clock, we got ready to get into bed, and my wife said, I've got a really bad feeling. I said, baby, that's just your emotions. This has been a whale of a battle for us. You're raw. It's going to be okay. We're bringing her home tomorrow. I held her in my arms, and we both fell asleep exhausted. About 12 o'clock, phone rang. Mr. Friedman, get here as quickly as you can. What's the matter? What's going on? Mr. Friedman, we don't have time. Hurry. You might not make it in time. As we raced to the hospital, I remember my wife looking at me, and she said, is this all the time we're going to get with her? We got into the hospital, and the doctor came in. He looked at me, and we were in the waiting room, and he said, what's wrong? What's going on? And I said, the medicine you gave her, sir, That's what's wrong. And he got some big old eyes, and he ran into the NICU ward, and there was a cardiac team in there, and they came out about 30 minutes later. By this time, the elders of my church had gotten there. And to his credit, this man walked up to me and he said, "I'm so sorry, Frank. It's my fault. I was in a hurry. I miscalculated the dose. And she got 5 times what she was supposed to have. And it put her in cardiac arrest and stopped her heart." Now, I hope you know that becoming a Christian does not remove your humanness. And everything in my being wanted to put my arms around this man and stuff his head into the wall in Jesus' name. But what does the verse say? I can do even this through Christ who strengthens me. And so with my little bitty faith, over and against everything that was raging in me, I reached out and put my arms around this man, hugged him very tightly, and said, "I love you, and I forgive you. Now I want you to not even think about us out here. Go bring all your resources into play and make this little girl better." We later found out that she was out 22 minutes. That's a long, long time. She was in a coma for several days. Oh, and by the way, then I put his head through. No, I'm kidding. I didn't. Janet went home to take care of the other babies, and I stayed by her side. And mid-morning, they wheeled a machine in, and I said, "What's that?" They said, "Well, we're going to check her brainwaves." And I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, sir, we're going to find out if she's here or not." Oh, my goodness. How long does it take to get the results? Oh, we'll know with the flick of the switch. Can we wait for Janet to get here? No, we've got to do this right away. Are you ready, Frank? No. But what does the verse say? So the nurses all came in, and they'd gotten to love her over the months she'd been in there. And the doctors came in, and we all held hands. And he flicked that switch. He looked at it for a while. He looked up at me and he went. I could have shot him for being so melodramatic. The nurses screamed, the doctors screamed, everybody screamed. And he said, "She's not only here, she's all here." A little while later, we got her home. They told us this little child will never talk, certainly never walk. We didn't know what she had. We had to take her to hospitals all over the country. We got a diagnosis of something called arthrogryposis multiplex congenita, which is 1 in 10,000 births, but there's 350 different kinds of this thing. And finally, about 15 months later, we were at Seattle Children's, and a doctor from Canada who's made this her life's work walked in and said, "Oh, distal type 2E. What does that mean?" She said, "Well, I've seen about 40 cases in the world so far." What does it mean? It means all the damage was done in the womb, and now it's a fight. Well, then we're going to fight. And so we fought with about 12 different doctors and therapies, and we started doing therapies at home. And I remember coming home up to her one day, and I was trying to work on her little legs, and she started to scream. It's because my hands were associated with pain. And I said, "That's it. We stop home therapy because my hands are not going to be associated with pain for this child." At age 5, she started to talk. At age 9, we experienced nothing short of a miracle. My wife called me in tears. She said, Avery's walking. I said, what happened? She said, well, I was at therapy. And our therapist, Holly, had been with her since she was little. They would exercise her and stretch her, and it hurts. And so afterwards, they'd put her in a weight-bearing treadmill so she could get the walking motion. And so she said, let's go in the treadmill, Avery. And Avery said, Miss Holly, I don't want to do the treadmill. She's talking now, and she's female. So she said, it's okay, I'll hold you, and we'll walk around the office. And she said, no, Miss Holly, I don't want to do that either. Well, then what are you going to do, Avery? And Avery says, I'm going to walk. She says, baby, you don't know how to walk. No, Miss Holly, I'm going to walk. She's okay. So she stood Avery up. She got in front of her because Avery could take like 1-2 steps and fall. And she put out her arms to catch her, and Avery turned around, took off about 45 steps the other direction. And Holly screamed, and my wife screamed, and nurses and doctors came out, and they were screaming. And now she walks and talks, and I say, would you please sit down and be quiet? "22 surgeries now, 12 bouts of pneumonia, 5 cardiac arrests. I can deal with the surgeries. What I can't deal with is the soul. She's a very happy girl, but she falls a lot, and it really bothers her. And one time, I remember she fell and she broke her leg, and in the ambulance, she said, Daddy, I don't like my life. Why can't I be a normal little girl? How does a daddy answer that? Now my number 3 has developed a progressive epilepsy. She wants to be a doctor. They've got her on the max dose of meds. They can't control the seizures. We're being told if this doesn't work that we've got to go to the Mayo Clinic and try to figure that one out. And there are times I say, all right, Lord, I read about your favor. And I understand that your ultimate favor is your presence in my life. But there's also physical favor, Lord. And I don't understand. I don't. But I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I'll tell you, my friends, this truth. I don't know what tomorrow holds. But I do know who holds tomorrow. And more important, I know this. That the one who holds tomorrow is going to hold me when I have to face tomorrow. And that's enough. Because in the moment of my faith, he promises to be all that he is to whatever I need. And I can do it through experiencing his strength. You know, there's a hospital in Baton Rouge that still buzzes to this day about a man and his wife who had great faith. What a crock. That was not great faith that day. That was little teeny tiny faith in a great big God who did what he promises to do, which is to live his life through our bodies just like he did 2,000 years ago in our bodies instead of Christ's. That's what that was. They saw Jesus' love. They saw Jesus' forgiveness. They saw Jesus' mercy flowing through the life of a man who wanted to knock that guy's head off. I don't know you. I don't know what you're going through. but I know the world we live in, and so I can make some pretty good guesses. And I promise you that this is not just a verse on the printed page. He wants it to be every one of our experiences we trust him by faith. So what I would like to do is pray over you. And to do that, I'd like you to stand. Why do I have you stand? Tell me something, my friends. Whenever God showed up in the Old Testament and manifested his glory, what did the man do who got to see the glory of God? What did he do? Fell on his nose. But did you ever read Jude 24 and 25 in the New Covenant economy? Now to him who is able to make us stand in his presence blameless with great joy. Do you realize that if the living God showed up right now and manifested his glory in this room, we could stand in his presence? You would not have to fall to your nose. You could fall to your nose if you wanted to worship him, but you don't have to. See, we could actually stand defiantly against the accuser. I'm blameless, and I'm full of joy over that. But you do realize we'd be standing very humbly before God. So stand in his presence, open your arms to the posture of receiving. Let me pray for you. Father, we had some fun today. We laughed, and it's so good to laugh, especially at ourselves because we provide a lot of material. But we want to be honest, it's a tough world that we live in. We were all designed to live in the Garden of Eden, every man and woman in this place. And this is not the Garden of Eden. And so there are things that happen to us that we were never designed to experience. And so I look at these men and these women today, these young men and young women who are experiencing things that I would love to share with them and put my arm around them and walk with them. But this isn't the time. We don't have time for that. So, Father, I pray that as they open their arms by faith, that they would receive all that you long to be to them. As they trust you by faith. That you would provide the strength right now for them to go through that heartache, to go through that sorrow. Maybe it's some rejection. Maybe it's some loss. Maybe it's some illness. Maybe it's sorrow, depression. Father, whatever it is, they're trusting you. Flood their spirit. Let you flood out their soul and body, the strength that you have promised to provide for them, that they might be able to stand victoriously. For we as Christians are the only ones on this planet who can share tears of sorrow and have joy at the same time. We're an enigma. Father, make that real for each and every man and woman in this place today as they trust you by faith, that you would be their strength and they would be able to do all things through you who strengthens them. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. Let's worship him.
There is only one.
Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to share one thing. Tonight we're going to walk through the new covenant in its basics. If you've got friends you've been wanting to bring to understand why you believe what you believe, bring them tonight. Because we're going to do everything we can to bring it down to about a 5th grade level. The mind of God in a 5th grade level. So tonight's the night to bring them.
And what time is that? 5 o'clock.